All right, so welcome back to the second part of Section 4. Once again, should be relatively short notes, not a whole lot to cover again today. This will be your final lesson before spring break, so please make sure you get that done. The grades will be updated um, today on Skyward, so everything that's supposed to be done will be in the grade book. Some of you should be texting friends and make sure they're actually doing homework. So that being said, we left off talking about Little Rock Nine and how President Eisenhower will use the National Guard to enforce the Supreme Court ruling of Brown versus Board of Education. And so with this, it's going to kind of bring an end to this fight of the states to desegregate. I mean, there's still going to be a lot of issues there, but for the most part, the federal government has now asserted its authority on the issue. And so, with the successful end to school segregation in 1954, this would lead to further protests in Montgomery, Alabama, starting in 1955. And the whole situation is going to start with a seamstress named Rosa Parks, who would be arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white man on a public bus. Today, she is known as the mother of the civil rights movement. At the end of the slide, there is a link that I will post in the description for you guys to check out a little bio on Rosa Parks. So please make sure you watch that. Civil rights leaders will organize the Montgomery bus boycott now, where African Americans refuse to use the entire city bus system until the company changes its segregation policy. So there will be 50,000 people that participate in this boycott. That means 50,000 people now aren't using the bus system, which means the buses make a lot less money. And because of this, there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to have to take place if this bus system wants to actually make money and not go bankrupt. Because back then, well, the government really didn't bail out businesses. If you went bankrupt, too bad you went bankrupt. And so here is your link to the Rosa Parks video. And so Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. will become a spokesperson for this protest movement that lasts for over a year. So the Martin Luther King Jr. will become kind of the head guy for the Montgomery bus boycott. This is where he's really going to start to make his name in the civil rights movement. And the whole bus boycott itself will last for just a little over a year. And as a result of the boycott, the U.S. Supreme Court would eventually order an end to segregation of public transportation. So eventually there will be a court case that will go through to the Supreme Court where they will rule in favor of desegregating public transportation. So not only are schools desegregated, but public transportation is now also desegregated. And so the Montgomery bus boycott will produce a new generation of leaders in the civil rights movement and introduce the technique of nonviolent protest as a way to achieve equality for minority groups in the United States. So the key part of this entire bus boycott is the entire thing was peaceful and that no one really got hurt during this. So the protesters remained peaceful the entire time. And we'll talk more about this in the civil rights movement chapter, which is chapter 19, that the more peaceful protesters are in their movement, and if they can keep it non-violent, then it actually means a lot more, as you will find out in chapter 19. So other minority groups will follow the lead of African Americans in demanding equal rights. Mexican Americans will find that peaceful protest can bring about change as well. So Mexican Americans will start to see changes happen for them, and they're going to utilize peaceful protests to bring about these changes. However, Native Americans will face terrible poverty on reservations managed by the federal government and made only token gains in the 1950s. So really, Native Americans will see no real help during this early civil rights movement in the 1950s. They're not going to see it till later, and we'll talk more about that in chapter 20 as well. However, in 1953, the federal government adopted the termination policy to eliminate reservations and blend Native Americans into American life. So in 1953, the federal government thought, well, we took away all their land already, gave them this reservation land, and now we're going to take away even the rest of that reservation land and just make them normal members of society. However, termination will be met with a fierce resistance, and eventually the policy will be dropped. The problems of poverty, discrimination, and lack of political representation, however, will continue for these Native American groups. And like I said, we will talk more about the Native Americans and this termination policy and things like that in chapter 20. There's an entire section just devoted to it. So, in summary, as the carefree decade of the 1950s came to an end, most Americans were unaware of the civil unrest that lurked just beyond the horizon. Changes were in the making that would alter American society forever. And we'll talk more about this whole concept of the civil unrest in the United States more in chapter 19 than we will in chapter 18. And we're going to talk about how these changes will change American society forever more in chapter 19 as well. So this ends chapter 17. Um, and so we will pick up with chapter 18 after spring break. I will figure out a way to get the note packet to you guys and how that will work over spring break. So please stay tuned for that. Um, and also keep in mind, chapter 18, we're going to talk about both John F. Kennedy and his policies, both foreign and domestic, as well as Lyndon B. Johnson. So we're going to talk about the Kennedy and Johnson years from 1960 to 1968. So, with that being said, please make sure you answer questions 44 through 47 to finish off the question packet. Both chapter 16 and 17 question packets should be done at this point. Also, make sure you complete the Google form that is attached in this video's description. Thank you, and have a good spring break. Be safe, and if you can, probably try to stay home and play outside a little bit.